Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
What's the spookiest thing about your family?
My old man was an airline pilot flying out of Victoria in Australia back in the 90s. At the time, there were a lot of UFO sightings in Bass Strait. One night, as a first officer, he and his captain saw a UFO. It freaked the captain out. He thought my dad was doing it. My dad came home, and even as a kid, I could tell he was visibly freaked out. He drew diagrams in his logbook of the patterns the UFOs made. He said it was a single point of light that split into many, that danced in front of the aircraft and flashed different lights. They then merged into one, and then shot off into the sky. During this time, I myself saw 2 UFOs. One from the porch of my mate's house, where we saw a red light hover over a field, then rocket away at an insane rate, when I thought it was a helicopter until it flew off. It was unreal. This was in Kyneton, looking over an area called Fiddler's Green, just west of the racecourse if you want to look it up on Google Maps. The next thing I saw may not have been a UFO, but I was with my dad driving past a place called Bacchus Marsh. Again, in the 90s, around the same time. I saw this light fall from the sky, then a huge flash on the horizon. The next day, Army helicopters were flying around, which happened quite rarely, and I saw one carrying a black box underneath it in a sling. I later asked my old man about the UFO he saw. He told me the captain he flew with recently died, and apparently on his deathbed, all he could talk about was the UFO. My dad was convinced the aliens were watching our family. Interestingly, I developed an insane fear over aliens at the time as a kid. Despite having no exposure to grays and media, I only recently am getting over this. The ALMAO meme helped a lot.
My father comes from a town in Texas made up of Czech immigrants. When he was around 11 or 12, his parents went out of town and left him with 2 aunts and their children, one of which was a boy, 7 years his elder. The eldest cousin left town for work shortly after my dad arrived. Well, after a couple of days, my dad developed a bad fever and was laid up for a day and a half. My father can't remember exactly what happened, but the story goes that these aunts were known to practice witchcraft brought over from Bohemia. Our family is Moravian. The eldest cousin returned home from work to find his mother and her sister chanting and burning stuff, etc., over my father. The cousin was furious and slapped away his mother and aunt, scooped my father up in his arms and rushed him to the hospital. At the hospital, they found that he had a ruptured appendix and was on the verge of death.
Great aunt is in a nursing home. Mind is fine, but her body is very weak, and she can't sit up or move without assistance. Get an emergency call from the home. Her vital signs have dropped. Blood pressure is practically 0. Death is imminent. Family rushed in. Everyone is sitting quietly in her room as she passes. Suddenly, she sits bolt upright in bed and cries, "He won't let me in!" Everyone is shocked. Aunt has no idea what has just happened. She is genuinely surprised everyone is there in her room. Lie and say we popped in for a surprise visit. Aunt is delighted. Nurse bursts into the room asking if everyone is all right. Aunt asks politely for a cup of tea. The doctor was baffled as her blood pressure had dropped past the point of no return, yet she snapped back as though nothing had happened. Judging by what she said, I guess she did die, but the powers that be turned her away as it wasn't her time. I never pressed her on what she saw or remembered, as she apparently had no idea how close she was to death and I didn't want to distress her. She was a lovely lady. I miss her.
My great-grandma had something similar happening. 3 different doctors went to diagnose her, and they said she was practically dead. Then she called out for God and her signals returned. She has no memory of the event and only knows about it because the doctors told her. She's 94 and still alive.
Everyone in the family died of cancer, including people that married into the family after migrating from all over the world. Do some digging into the village I live in. Almost everyone dies of cancer. Found an old diary of great-granddads. During World War II, the old quarry the town was built around nearly 300 years ago had a meteorite fall in it and flash boil all the water that filled it up after it was shut down. For some reason, they routed the drinking water through here. The cancers began about 2 years after that. Being diagnosed, at least. Also shorter lifespans, far more stillbirths and cases of things like Down syndrome. Meteors can contain things like radioactive elements, but not anything more significant than maybe 1% of meteorites or less containing curium, which does not occur naturally in nature. Something about this rock falling was making the water turn sour, or so it looked. It turned out later, the quarry was actually turned into a bunker for the royal family and a special train line that's now a hiking trail leading down there. The sicknesses began when it was built. The place was shut down in the late 90s, right when the deaths began to slow down. Nowadays, only people that lived here and drank the water for years are getting sick, but they are all still getting sick. Nobody has put 2 and 2 together but me, or worse, everyone has, and nobody speaks about it.
Both of my grandfathers were high-ranking Freemasons, and somehow knew each other, but how was never explained to me. On my mother's side, he was a minister, and spent a good deal of time in Asia as a missionary in the 50s. On my father's, he was the head engineer for Honeywell. One, maternal, was very liberal for the time. The other highly conservative, which makes how they knew each other strange to me. My grandmother on my mother's side was smuggled out of Sweden under a false name for some unknown to me reason at age 12. She didn't know a lick of English, yet graduated as an English teacher from college at age 19. She was also the May Queen of her graduating class. Christmas was a huge deal at my father's house, and the extended family would gather. Yet Jesus and God was never mentioned, nor ever a single prayer. Whenever I asked about this, everyone became strange and changed the subject. My maternal grandfather died before I was born, and his friend, also a high-ranking Freemason and bank president, married her to take care of her. This same grandmother has stories of seeing UFOs as far back as the late 40s, and there is even a newspaper article on it. When I was an infant, I almost died from a severe fever and had convulsions and required a spinal tap. And this occurred in late June, the feast of St. John. My paternal grandfather and step-grandfather always seemed disappointed in me since I can remember, and my entire family has in essence shunned me, to include my extremely wealthy father, former CEO of a major corp, forbidding any family member from attending my wedding, and my mother has in essence lost her mind, and I have no contact with any of them at this point, even though I have multiple college degrees and served as a U.S. Marine, etc.
Still in the thread, Marine bro? I got boot camp coming up.
And get ready for lots of screaming and yelling, cursing and shit you can't imagine. You will want to quit every minute of Phase 1, every day of Phase 2, and pray to make it through Phase 3. Just turn off all your sensibilities and desire for comfort and trust the process. You will make it through if you keep your eyeballs and ears open and do everything you are told with speed and intensity. Sound off as loud as humanly possible, and never question or even so much as roll your eyes at a drill instructor. If you don't successfully navigate some aspect at first, so what? Just keep trying without losing motivation. That is what they are looking for. They are expecting you to fuck everything up. It's the ones who keep moving forward regardless of the adversity placed before them who get noticed and rewarded. Not sure how shit is gonna look with the whole plague thing, but you are pretty much in a bubble the entire 3 months anyways, so my guess is you will get tested at the get-go, and that will be that. Good luck and get some. And the strangest, and possibly most fucked up part of the entire process is it will likely be your fondest memory of being in the Corps. Something you won't understand and will not believe until it is over.
My great-great-grandmother on my mother's side pissed off a bruja and apparently got our family cursed. All sorts of drug and alcohol problems in all my relatives because so many deaths, lots of craziness too. My grandmother had 7 kids. Only my aunt is the only one still alive out of them. 2 of my uncles died as kids. One was crushed to death by a Christmas tree as a 2-year-old. The other died in a car accident with my grandfather. One uncle overdosed in his 20s. Another uncle offed himself. Youngest aunt was abducted and killed walking home from work, and my mom drank herself to death. My grandmother had been one of 5 kids herself. Only all her siblings died of old age or are dying of health problems now.
My mom's side of the family are hillbillies from Ohio. The women of the family are psychic or spiritually sensitive, according to what my mom says, but she's a skeptic. I met my 98-year-old great-aunt, who hates all of my mother's family for how horrible they were to each other and always assumes they want her money and a 128-year-old house. She said she didn't want to lose the house because of all the spirits it had accumulated. She was reminiscing on old stories, and finally, people were leaving because strangely enough, they got a bunch of shit they wanted from her. I finally got to talk to her, and she said she wished she could have met me sooner because she wanted to give me her house. She said I had the gift, and she was going to die soon, and she wanted to meet me and get to know me better. It's been about 2 years since then, and she's still alive, according to my mom, who visited her since then, and she was disappointed I didn't make it. Also, side note that the house was haunted. Spending time in there felt like I was watching a movie, and having your back to an open area made a part of you clench that didn't feel attached to your muscles so much as it felt like your bones themselves were clenching. I'm not sure if I believe in specters and spooks, but that house had an ethereal quality to it that only extremely old structures have. It felt like if you tore up the carpet in the bathroom, you would have found a trapdoor to a basement no living soul should enter unprepared. Also, side note, I stare at people, and they always turn to face me. I used to catch shoplifters when I was a grocery manager doing this because the stupefied way they do it usually made them drop the items they were stealing. I think most people can do this because nobody ever acts like anything weird happened once they meet my gaze.
My mum's side of the family has claimed to have dreams and premonitions about family members in trouble. My grandfather used to joke about us being part gypsy to piss off older relatives. Believed in ghosts, my mum has sensed when one of my brothers was in trouble, like calling him after a car crash. He broke an arm before any news reached us. My mother went to a fortune teller when she was pregnant with each of us kids to learn about us, and the teller predicted I would be a sickly child and nearly die a lot. My grandfather had a dream about my mother on a plane, and where all the lights went out on the plane and people were screaming. He told my grandmother he didn't want my mum on the flight, but my mother went anyway. Sure enough, the plane had trouble and lost power. People were screaming and the pilots were preparing an emergency landing, then the plane kicked back on and righted itself. I have seen ghosts, and I have felt something off about interactions with people, and have warned friends before bad shit happens. And not to sound too crazy, but I have had dreams months or weeks in advance about conversations or situations before they have happened, like entire conversations, and I see myself in first person, wearing the same clothes, and I have even seen my reflection in one of these dreams.
I legit think my parents were body swapped. Not like possessed or something. Someone simply put identically looking humans in their place. When I was 6.
I had exactly the same feeling about my dad at age 6. He went on a trip to the USSR, and when he came back I spent years with the impression this man wasn't the one who left. I'd almost forgotten about that. I can't remember how long I felt that way, but it was a very long time. There's a syndrome called Capgras Delusion, where people feel loved ones have been replaced. This is usually something that happens to adults with a brain injury, schizophrenia, or dementia. I think it might happen to a lot of young kids because of rapid brain development. Invasion of the Body Snatchers probably became a cult classic because millions of people related to it via childhood memories.
My dad and his family used to live on a ranch out in Mexico that had a haunted building on the property. Unfortunately, my grandpa lost the place to gambling debts before I was born, so I was never able to see the place for myself. Speaking of my dad, he also claims to have seen a UFO with his brother while he was out in the jungles one night. Apparently it was close enough that it was unmistakable. My mom told me a story about how a fortune teller, gypsy, or some weird mystic-type person, who doesn't remember what word she used exactly, told her that I had an aura of death about me or something when I was a baby. She didn't tell me this story until I joked about getting a job at a mortuary in high school, which I guess gave her some kind of weird flash back to this event. Spooked her so good that she said I can't get a job there. Not that I was seriously going to anyways. Imagine if that's all the prediction was about. Me, working at a mortuary. Nothing ominous about dying an untimely death or being haunted. Not paranormal, but I did also have a great-grandfather who killed a bunch of people during the Mexican Revolution. He wasn't even Mexican himself. He just traveled all the way there from Spain to be a part of it. Presumably because he wanted to kill people so badly. He killed so many people and committed so many heinous acts that no priest wanted to hear his confessions. Or so the story goes.
I've never mentioned this anywhere else because it's too weird. My mom and uncles always talk about vivid dreams about giants or really, really tall people. My mom, her siblings, and her dad are all really tall, have huge feet and hands, everyone mentally ill and weird. She had an abdominal x-ray once, and the doctor told her to her face her intestines were weird and unnatural. He said everything was in the wrong place. My mom was in a car accident when I was 16. Miraculously survived rolling her car down a mountain, and to this day says it's impossible that she survived. She also often describes other strange dreams. They're not as creepy as the giant dreams, but she describes these reflective beads that can grow or shrink, that can float and travel, and that can give her anything she wants or turn into anything she wants. She just has to touch it and think about what she wants. She's getting old and has started getting hallucinations at night, and it's the same thing with really tall people again. I seem to take after my dad, so I'm completely healthy, normal-sized, and don't get dreams like that. But my brother is exactly the same as my mom and uncles.
Genetic reincarnation. Think Assassin's Creed. Your mom's just reliving her giant ancestors' memories. They're not mentally ill. They just come across that way because they're in touch with all those ancestral spirits. Try and ask her for stuff she can recall. Research lost history. The extinct race of giant humans. That stuff. See if you can corroborate anything. Best of luck.
Great-grandma was a Native American. When the animals would get sick, she would lock them in the pen next to the farmhouse and wander off into the night with a herb pouch. She would come back at sunrise and the animal would be healed. She wouldn't tell anyone because they were not pure bloods. My brother claimed to be haunted by demons, ended up taking his own life. Parents claimed I would talk to strange people that no one else could see, but only at night. They would teach me stuff about the names of stars and constellations. This was before pre-K and the internet. While talking about it one night, they heard something slam into the roof and roll off, but nothing was outside when they looked. Mom claims to have seen my dead father in her dreams and says that she is certain it was the real him.
Dad told me from the moment I was born he knew me as an adult man, a point he says I haven't reached yet, currently 28. He says he thinks he knows the man I'll be when he's on his deathbed. Not the only spooky thing he's said. He's recounted a vivid encounter he and two friends had with some aliens before I was born. He's also very sensitive to ambient energies and spirits. I think I might be too. Wasn't until fairly recently that I realized most people can't sense each other's energies.
That's interesting. This reminds me once I was talking to my father and I had a vision of him being born. I don't know if I was his mother in a past life or I will be in the future, but I got the feeling I was or will be his mother somehow.
I had dreams about my son all the time while I was pregnant. He would just talk to me constantly, and when I was preoccupied, he would repeat Mom until he got my attention. He is only a couple months old. But just like in my dreams, he talks to me constantly. No idea what he is saying, but he makes direct eye contact with me, which he did in my dreams. And if I walk away to do something, he starts saying ma until I come back.
Literally every young kid trait with their mom. No mystery here.
My great-grandfather was a friend of one WNS magician during the 20s and 30s. He learned some stuff during his early life. He literally made a pact with the devil who was in the shape of a white snake, which several people saw. He had a comfortable life, survived during both world wars fighting on the losing side, and he also survived commie oppression once he was translocated to Czechoslovakia. He married into a prominent family from Lviv during World War II. He had 5 children. The last child was born deformed physically and mentally. I remember her when I was young. She lived to 40 years old. According to my grandfather, his father always regretted making a pact with the devil, and he told him that his sister was deformed because of his pact. Also, he was saying magic was nearly gone after World War I, and most of the magicians after this were just LARPing by using demonic powers. The other spooky part of my family is my mother took her own life. In several weeks, our home was tormented by evil spirits until it was cleansed by my grandmother.
I remember getting a sense of dread whenever I entered my great-grandmother's house. One thing I remember was a room in the attic. I don't think I have ever entered it, but I have this image of an old sickly white bedroom in the attic and a disgusting sweet smell of a foreign candy. Also, my grandparents live in a large house. The only place you can wash yourself in is in the cellar, and you have to go through a narrow and steep staircase and walk through the basement to get there. When I was a child and I walked in the staircase, I would get this feeling that someone would start chasing me there, that the lights could go out at any moment and the malicious entity would catch me. I always ran and panicked at the proper living space.
My dad says that when he was younger, he once saw a UFO hovering over some large power lines. It was using a light beam to steal energy. My mother's mom and her mom both hung themselves, years apart. My cousin lived in a haunted farmhouse. One day he got pissed at the ghost for knocking things over and making noises, so he started yelling at it. Then, his TV caught on fire. I grew up pretty close to a small amusement park that was abandoned in the 60s. There were no rides or anything left, just some decaying buildings. Then, in the 80s, a biker gang kidnapped a young couple, took them to that property, executed the guy, and then raped and killed the girl. We moved when I was in middle school, unrelated to the above story. Our new house was on the side of a hill, and our backyard was cut into the hill so it would be flat. Because of the cut, there was a small dirt and stone cliff between the yard and the forest, maybe 15 feet high. Deer would routinely jump off the cliff and break their legs in our backyard. They would moan and squirm around in pain, unable to stand up, until we shot them in the head. I saw a child ghost once when I was in college. A little boy standing in our apartment's bathtub wearing one of those old sailor-style school uniforms. That's all I got.
Pure LARP.
The UFO thing is my dad's story. He's a weird guy. The self-ends on my mom's side are real. My cousin's haunted farmhouse is his story. I never saw a ghost there, but I was only ever there for large family gatherings. The abandoned amusement park murders are real. The deer thing is real and weird. Not sure if it qualifies as spooky, though. We got free deer meat, which none of us really liked. The ghost I saw in college could have just been me half awake and drunk.
It's interesting to me that you mentioned the little sailor suit the kid was wearing. I have a similar memory from when I was a little kid. I would wake up and go in my parents' bedroom in the morning a lot, and one morning I remember when I entered their room, I walked through the ghosts of 3 kids, but they were all dressed up like they were wearing adult clothing that didn't fit, like they had been playing dress-up.
Dreamland Park was a small amusement park located on Pricetown Road in Rooskamener Township, Pennsylvania. The park, which was a short drive from Reading, was operated by Ralph Kreitz, a man who ran many illegal gaming establishments in the 1930s and 40s. The park only featured a band theater, a roller rink, a midget car racetrack, a few rides, and picnic groves. Dreamland Park is an entity known to many, primarily for the brutal August 1969 murders of Glenn W. Eckert and Marilyn H. Scheckler. On August 13th of 1969, 2 teens, Marilyn H. Scheckler, 18 of Westmoreland County, and Glenn W. Eckert, 20 of Robesonia, were murdered in the woods surrounding the park by 2 members of the Pagan motorcycle gang. The couple had driven to a location along Skyline Drive that overlooks Reading, Pennsylvania, during the early morning hours of August 13th. It was there that two pagan gang members entered Eckert's car and forced him to drive to a train station in Leesport. They then abandoned Eckert's car and forced the two into a box truck owned by the motorcycle gang. At approximately 2 a.m., the four gang members returned to Dreamland Park and forced the two teens into the woods. Just inside the woods, Eckert was shot to death and Scheckler was beaten to death in the head with a rock. The bodies were hastily covered by rocks and debris by the gang members. On October 23rd of 1969, the police finally found the bodies of the teens in the woods around the park after an exhaustive search. The case went to trial in 1970, and two of the bikers, Leroy S. Stoltzfus Jr., 21, and Robert Martinolich, 22, were convicted of murdering the teens during two separate trials. Both claimed innocence. Stoltzfus and Martinolich both received life sentences in separate state prisons. On March 28, 2010, Leroy Stoltzfus died at the Select Specialty Hospital at Conemaugh Memorial Medical Center in Johnstown. Stoltzfus was 61 and had served 40 years in prison. Officials said that he had been hospitalized for a lengthy period prior to his death and died from natural causes. In 2007, Robert Martinolich asked for a new trial, claiming his lawyers, Clement Cassidy and Joseph Nalabovich, both of Reading, did not investigate the case thoroughly and struck plea deals with co-defendants who testified against him. A new trial was denied. Robert Martinolich is still serving his life sentence at the State Correctional Institution Laurel Highlands in Somerset, Pennsylvania. The other two bikers who were involved, James M. Eways and Harlan E. Bailey, were not charged for the murders because they turned state evidence against Stoltzfus and Martinolich. Indications are the park opened on a modest scale in 1939, as on Oct. 21, 1939, it was reported that the Lone Star AC basketball team, formerly the Dreamland Park team, is reorganizing for the coming season. This is the first reference found in regard to the park's existence. Alton Kreitz, brother of racketeer Ralph Kreitz, bought the former farmstead in 1938. While the two worked together to develop the 17-acre park complex, Ralph chose to remain in the shadows. Ralph's specialty was gaming in the form of pinball machines, punch boards, slot machines, and vending machines. High-stake poker games were not uncommon at the park, but never out in the open. In government testimony following the IRS confiscation of the property in 1956 for unpaid taxes, Ralph claimed his brother owned the land, but he built the structures and acquired the amusements featured there. The best description of what existed at Dreamland Park was included in an inventory prepared for public sale of the complex. The park has 26 heated buildings, including 5 dwellings, which survive. There is a 267 by 94-foot auditorium with an air-conditioned theater which seats 1,880 persons comfortably, or 2,200 otherwise. The auditorium also contains a 68 by 88-foot dance hall. There is a stage and dressing rooms in the theater section. There is also a circular carousel building, 70 feet in diameter, in ruins on the property, without a merry-go-round in it. Near the entranceway, there was a small miniature auto racetrack. After the Dreamland Park incident, James M. Eways became a prominent businessman in the Reading area and was president of Mast Engineering Inc., located on 5th and Walnut Streets. In the early 90s, Eways moved into a former chapel converted into a house located in Wernersville. The chapel, built in 1890, was part of the old Grand View Sanatorium grounds in South Heidelberg Township. The chapel was the source of local folklore and frequently attracted teenage curiosity seekers. The chapel and a nearby meat locker were rumored to be haunted. The meat locker, the name locals gave to an old cold cellar in the mountains above Wernersville, was the source of a number of haunted tales. It was once used to store food for the Grand View Sanatorium in South Heidelberg Township. Legend speaks of a man who chopped up 5 bodies and hid them in the cavernous cellar along Grandview Road. In the early morning hours of June 15, 1996, 5 teens were driving up and down the street outside Eways' home, shouting threats and obscenities. The teens also shined a flashlight into Eways' windows as they drove by. During the 4th drive past Eways' home, Eways suddenly emerged from between 2 pillars in front of his house, squared off to face the slow-moving car and took careful aim with a .357 Magnum handgun. E-Ways fired 2 shots at the car. One shot went through the passenger window of the teen's car and hit 17-year-old Michael A. Abate, the third in the head. The teen died about 20 hours later in the hospital. The surviving teens admitted they had been drinking alcohol and smoking marijuana and were harassing E-Ways about 2 a.m. after going to Grandview Road to view the old meat locker. E-Ways was arrested and charged with first and third-degree murder, voluntary manslaughter, involuntary manslaughter, aggravated assault, simple assault, and recklessly endangering another person. E-Ways' lead attorney, the late Emmanuel H. Demetrio, argued the shooting occurred accidentally after E-Ways was harassed by the 5 teens. Demetrio successfully argued to have the September 1996 trial moved to Erie County because of the extensive publicity of the case and E-Ways' association with defendants convicted of the double murder in Dreamland Park in 1969. On October 1, 1996, after 7 hours of deliberations, the Erie County Court jury acquitted E-Ways of first and third-degree murder, voluntary manslaughter, and aggravated assault. He was convicted of involuntary manslaughter and 5 counts of recklessly endangering another person. E-Ways was ordered to state prison for 2 to 5 years as a result of the verdict, the maximum sentence for involuntary manslaughter. In addition to the jail sentence, E-Ways was ordered to serve 10 years of probation, 2 years each for convictions on 5 counts of recklessly endangering another person. The judge allowed E-Ways to remain free on $300,000 bail, pending an appeal of his conviction, but E-Ways was imprisoned September 3, 1998 when his appeals were exhausted. E-Ways spent the entire 5 years in prison and was released in September of 2003.
Up till the day that she died, my grandmother actually believed in those witch doctors that sold medallions and the like on TV. Pretty common here in Mexico. She was very delusional, so she hired on the more publicized ones, because she believed that her old age weakening was actually a curse cast on by a snooty neighbor that she believed was a witch. And the witch doctor guy kept on telling her she was right. The guy ended up draining her retirement account and her dead husband's pension fund. This went on for months before my father caught wind of this. Good ending to the story though. As she laid to rest, my grandmother was pleased to know that the snooty neighbor had passed the night before under mysterious circumstances.
My dad is a forest ranger and our family used to live in a woods for round about 30 years. In this time, from a very young age on, I had some weird encounters with my father, always brushed off as hobos roaming the forest. He was adamant that the explanation for my encounters was a wild bum. Always. And never something else like a boar or a wild dog. Also, in the first year after my birth, he slept with his gun beside the bed. My mother told me a few years ago,
More.
Since I was a kid, I had weird dreams, which later developed into having precog dreams. My sisters are mostly normal, beside the youngest one is the only family member with blonde hair. My parents are pretty much non-believers. They don't believe in ghosts, cryptids, not even nature spirits like pixies or fae. Mention that you saw something weird and immediately they tell you it's not that weird at all. Be me, 19 years old, draw friend, chill on a haystack on the big meadow behind the house near the tree line. Evening comes and the light diminishes to the point where I can't continue drawing. Get down from the haystack and start to walk home. Sudden rustle in the bushes behind me. Turn around, watch the tree line. See shadowy figure with approximately 80 centimeters height scuffling along the tree line, partly being covered by tall plants. The distance to the tree line was about 30 meters, so I decided to slowly walk backwards in case of boar. I still could jump on a haystack and be safe. Suddenly, this piece of shit made a 180 turn and stood up. I shit you not. What I was taking for a boar was a humanoid figure at least 1.7 meters in height, completely in black with a white stripe on the back. Needless to say, I was using the way back to my house. Took me literally a few seconds for 200 meters. Tell my dad. Must have been a hobo. You may have startled him. Thanks, Dad. No problem with hobos monitoring your house and kids in the middle of nowhere.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more Greentext will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check the Odyssey and Rumble pages for separate archives of previous broadcasts.